What's up everybody, we're back with another raid guide, and today we're taking a look at Stone Legion Generals on Mythic difficulty. I'll be going over most of the mechanics, how to deal with them, and our overall tactic for this fight. So for this encounter you want 2 tanks, 4 or 5 healers, and 13 to 14 DPS. Setup wise, Resto Shamans and their Spirit Links are great for the healing immune parts of this encounter, otherwise 1 Warlock for Gateway and big blasters overall. This fight has a lot of priority targets that needs to die in order and at the correct timings, as well as pushing bosses to intermission at specific timings. But let's go over what's new on Mythic. First out is the ads. In phase 1, 2, and 3, General Call will summon 3 skirmishers. Skirmies? Every now and then, and these skirmies will teleport behind a random player, smack him, and apply the bleed wicked laceration. But more importantly, when they reach 30%, they turn into a Storm Gale effigy. Yeah, you all know what that is. Pretty much as soon as they reach 30%, you start getting pushed back towards the edge. And this stacks, meaning if 2 or 3 skirmies reach 30% at the same time, the pushback will be 3 times as strong, and you fly away like the beautiful bird you are. But we'll talk tons more about skirmishers later. Then there's the Stone Legion Goliath. Its Soul Taint effigy that's triggered post 30% now decreases healing taken by 20% per stack, stacking every second up to 5 stacks. So healing immune. And that's why Spirit Link is really broken here, as it will carry any healing immune that's dicey. Doable without, but having slinks allows you to not play perfect and still be fine. Now, during intermission, the commandos that spawn now also have a low health trigger, namely Volatile Stone Shell. When a commando reaches 20%, it will gain a 200k-ish absorb, and if that's not broken within 4 seconds, commando goes boom boom, raid goes bye bye. When they have the shield up, they're also immune to most AoE, so it requires you to actually target and smack them instead of just AoEing it down. But as always, I will go over this in a bit. Now on the subject of intermission, the anime orbs that you deliver to Renathal now deals a large amount of shadow damage every 2 sec while a player is holding one, and when you dunk an orb it will deal shadow damage and knock back any player within 45 yards. And this ain't no short knockback either. You fly. If you're in the middle of the room when this goes off, you fly off. And that's pretty much it for the new mechanics. Now with that out of the way, let's go over DPS cooldowns. Now there's a lot of ways to do this fight, and depending on what you go for, DPS cooldown changes. But I'll go over this from what we did, which was slow and steady. Like watching me stream on Twitch. Now you need to split up your DPS cooldown in 2 sets for most of this fight. Depending on your setup and each player's overall DPS, this can change. You can do a 50-50 split and change along the way if you're overkilling something or lack some DPS at some crucial moment. If you're running multiple DKs with Necro Covenant, you want to split these up so you can get their grippy hands on most of the skirmies. And mages can pretty much have combust up to cover both cooldown groups. The idea is to have sufficient cooldowns to kill each non-intermission Goliath fast, and at the same time getting some extra DPS on the skirmies that are up. Next out is Weakauras. Cause who doesn't love Weakauras? There's 4 Weakauras I strongly suggest getting for this fight. We'll link all 4 of them in the description below. First 2 everyone should get, or well, except tanks I guess. They automate the reverberating eruption soaks and puddles when you hit phase 2 and after. So it assigns players to a raid mark, calls for backups if that player can't soak due to another mechanic, etc. So it just makes that part very simple. If it says go to skull on your screen, you go to skull. Next Weakaura is for the anime orbs in the intermission. It gives a list of every player holding an orb, how long they have left before it despawns, how many you've dunked, etc. So it helps a lot when it comes to calling the intermission orbs. And lastly, there's a Seismic Shift Weakaura, shows when to stack and where to move during Seismic upheaval. With that said, let's go over some marks and positionings. Cue the picture! Makes perfect sense, right? Now, first thing you want to do is put out world markers like you see in the picture. This is for the reverberation soaks, and Weakaura will call out these marks when you do need to soak, so it's good to have them. You can also see where we put our wicked blades and crystallize in the different phases, but most of this will be explained along in the guide. So let's go over phase 1 a bit. Now for the tanking, we had 1 tank on Kal all the time and 1 tank for Goliath and skirmishers during phase 1. And Kal tank made sure to remove bleeds on every crystallize. The skirmies will apply wicked laceration to random players, so do make sure to always remove bleeds in Crystallize if you have any stacks at all. Or odds are you get one from Skirmy, then you get Wicked Blade, and then you get jumped by a Skirmy, and then you're dead. Now on pull, you want to drag General Call to the right side of the room, roughly where we have our star marker, which is where one of the 3 skirmishers spawns from. All of the raid needs to be on the right side of the boss so that there's never a risk of getting hit with a blade. Melee and tanks, keep in mind that you kinda need to be max melee range away from the boss or blade might hit you / detonate as it's returning to call. A few seconds in, you get your first Goliath and skirmies. First DPS cooldown group should nuke and cleave off of Goliath. Rest of your DPS should kill skirmishers one by one. You can still cleave off the skirmishers, just make sure that anyone who isn't using DPS cooldowns cleave from the skirmishers in order. So skull first, then cross, lastly square, so you don't get tons of wins. If possible, you want to finish off the first set of skirmies and Goliath before the Crystallize, cause wins or healing immune during Crystallize can be a pain, or just Spirit Link. During all of this, you get your first Heart Rend as well. Now, due to the recent nerfs, the Dispeller no longer gets a Giga debuff, so in phase 1 we mass dispelled all of them, and popped some cooldowns to heal through it. But you can single dispel these as well, and after phase 1 we single dispelled most of them. Try to avoid dispelling if the Heart Rend player is targeted by stuff like Wicked Blade, or if the raid is healing immune due to the Goliath, as they will need a ton of healing when you do dispel. Lastly, DKs, keep in mind that if you get Heart Rend and pop AMS before getting dispelled, you won't get the hemorrhage dot, avoiding it completely. Following this, when Call reaches 75-ish% HP, a new Goliath will spawn in 10 seconds. So it's always every 25%, and then the timer starts. You can all swap to the Goliath, but hold second group's cooldowns for when the second set of skirmishers do spawn. Same thing again here, try to get these down before your second Crystallize if possible. Now, depending on your overall DPS, you can either push boss before the third set of skirmishers or as soon as they're dead after. Doesn't change anything a whole lot, just know what you're aiming for either before or after the third set. Now let's take a look at the first intermission. For this strat, we bunch up a ton of commandos and blow them up at the same time with cooldowns instead of all of them one by one. Now most of the time they spawn one by one, so you'll need to pick them up and, well, ignore them. You want the entire raid to move close to the ledge, roughly around our purple mark, and drag the new Goliath over there. Call tanks boss a bit away from the raid towards the big statue in the back, and Wicked Blades should be dealt with away from raid close to it. We had everyone nuke down the Goliath, and the Call tank picked up all the commandos. This was just so we didn't accidentally bring one of the commandos down to 20% too early. The goal here is to kill the Goliath before the first intermission Crystallize. If you're not able to do that, then you can just stop DPS on Goliath when it's around 40 to 45% HP and wait for enough commandos to have spawned and you nuke it down together with them. You want to have at least 4 commandos up before you start blasting away. Keep in mind that if you do keep the Goliath alive for this, it will spank your tank and almost one-shot players it jumps to when it's doing its Ravenous Feast. So when it's at 3 stacks of Ravenous Hunger, feast targets will need to be bopped, or you need to rest them or use Ankh Totem, which is why it's nice to kill it before it gets too spicy. But yeah, if you can't kill it before Crystallize, kill it after, because healing immune during Meteor isn't fun either. Either way, when you have 4 or 5 commandos, have one of your cooldown groups blow them all up, and keep an eye out for any commando that triggers their absorb earlier, so you can swap and make sure they don't go boom boom. Marksman Hunter's bouncy aimed shot works on this shield as well as their wild spirit, so if possible you want 1 or 2 hunters to blow cooldowns here to make sure their shields pop. Now for the anime orbs. If you kill the Goliath as soon as you get into intermission, you want to dunk this orb as soon as you pick it up. When you kill the 4 or 5 commandos, you want to dunk these fairly fast. However, keep in mind anytime you do dunk, it triggers the knockback. So have a gateway going from near the purple mark and just outside Renatal's circle. Players who have picked up an orb should be ready to use the gateway at a moment's notice, and you should have someone calling each dunk. Player X, dunk, wait for the knockback. Player Y dunks, wait for the knockback, etc, etc. Now following this, you want to nuke down commandos one by one, so no cleaving, none of that shenanigans. And you do this until you need 1 more orb, then you stop DPS altogether. The entire raid moves down to the right corner-ish near the entrance, and this is just so you don't get knocked off when you transition out of the intermission. Wait for the 4th Crystallize and 7th Wicked Blade. Kill off a commando when there's a few seconds left before the 7th Wicked Blade, and as soon as the blades are done, you want to dunk and transition. Why we wait for these is whenever we dunk the last orb before the 7th blade, skirmies spawned late in phase 2. When we waited, they spawned as soon as we transition, which is to prefer. We also life grip the 4th crystallized target out of it to avoid soaking the meteor, as there's a new one very shortly after, but you don't need to skip it at all, but you can. Now, as soon as you've dunked, you'll get 2 knockbacks, one from dunking, one from transitioning, and at the same time, Grashal will start landing and 3 skirmies spawn. Pick up all the ads, boss, move a bit more into the center of the room to give space around the world markers for the reverberation soaks. All DPS should instantly nuke down skull-marked skirmy while you wait for the Goliath to spawn. As soon as it's up, next CD group, nuke down Goliath and finish off skirmies one by one. Reset any bleeds you have in the crystallize. Blades here go out towards the statue in the back, as that's where they'll be coming from when General Call is flying around. For the reverberating eruption, follow the Weakaura. If it tells you to go to star, you go to star. Now, whenever there's a seismic upheaval, everyone except tanks stacked behind the boss, and if you were targeted by it, you moved left. If you weren't, you moved out a bit to the right, or vice versa, whichever works for you. We marked a ranged player that everyone stacked on behind the boss to help with this a bit. And like I said earlier, there's a Weakauras that'll show you if you targeted or not, linked in the description. Now, after the first set of skirmies and Goliath, you'll get a second set of skirmies to deal with before the second Goliath spawns, so we didn't use any cooldowns in particular for these. Just single target them down one by one. When the second Goliath spawned, everyone swapped to it, but we held the next group's cooldowns for the third set of skirmies to spawn before we popped them. And we transitioned to second intermission before the 4th set of skirmies. Just as in phase 1, you can wait for another wave of skirmies to spawn before transitioning if your DPS is a little bit on the low side. If so, you might need to pull boss away a bit and just stop DPS for a while as you wait for the 4th set of skirmies to spawn and for you to get done with them. Now, what you'll lose most people on in phase 2 is seismic shifts, and combination of seismic shift plus skirmy wins. So ideally, no wins during seismic, and don't use any movement abilities when you're running away. Just stack up, wait for shift, run as a group. And now comes the fun part, second intermission. Our approach was pretty much the same here as for the first intermission. The difference being the reverberation soaks during this, which makes dunking a tad more annoying as you can't dunk while soaking. So you have limited windows where you can actually dunk. Now, as soon as intermission starts, pull Grashal and Goliath to the back in front of the statue. Players targeted by Wicked Blade needs to be all the way in the back so they don't hit anyone else. And again, we went all in on the Goliath, no cooldowns, and tried to kill it before first crystallize. Keep in mind that the Goliath's second feast, where it stuns a player, overlaps with a reverberating eruption, which can cause players to not be able to soak. So to avoid this, we always insta-bop the feasted player on the second feast. Pro tip. And we tanked all the commandos away until it was dead. But just like first intermission, you can wait with killing it and just get it to 40% before all the commanders are stacked and kill it with them. And you want to wait again until you have 4 or 5 commandos and wait for a reverberation soak and start nuking them down as soon as you're done soaking. This was usually the second reverberation during the intermission for us. And here's where it gets hectic. Ideally, you want to dunk all 4 or 5 orbs before the next set of soaks are needed, but that doesn't always pan out, so you might lose 1 or 2 orbs here. But the great thing about this fight is there's no real need to stress. If you miss 1 or 2 orbs, you'll just need to stay a tad longer in the intermission, so don't stress that too much. You wait for reverberation, you kill him off, and you dunk as many as possible before the next reverberation soak. Following this, we killed commandos one by one in between reverberation soaks and tried to get 1 or 2 orbs done between every soak. Keep doing that until you need 1 more orb, then kill it after a reverberation soak, move down to the left corner this time, kill and dunk it before a new set of soaks. Just avoid transitioning during blades though. Keep in mind that the reverberating eruption cooldown will reset on transition. We transitioned 1 second before new soaks went out and skipped them altogether, so don't stress about that too much. A few last words about second intermission. It might seem like a cluster fudge from hell, and just waiting around might also seem a bit strange, but like I said, you can kinda go on forever in the intermission, so lining up good dunks and transition felt a lot better than trying to stress through it. Now for the last phase, if you've made it this far, boss is pretty much dead. As soon as you transition, you get a new set of skirmishers and both the bosses at the same time. Move boss and raid a bit more to the middle of the room, wicked blades and crystallize same as phase 1, and raid behind bosses for seismic shift. Everyone should focus down skirmishers one by one, but hold all cooldowns. After the first soaks, pop bloodlust, finish off any skirmish and just go absolute ham on the bosses. We had one tank both bosses up until the second skirmish spawned, and then the other tank taunted both of them off. Old boss tank picks up all skirmies and tanks them away from the raid, so no damage is wasted accidentally or otherwise on the skirmies. And yeah, you just blast bosses. Do make sure to kill them off at the same time though. If your DPS is a bit on the low side, you could opt into just doing the phase like previous phases and tank swap like you normally would and kill off the second set of skirmies as well. We just thought it was easier to focus all damage on bosses and get the skirmies away. However, your tanks will take a ton of damage tanking both of them when they get higher stacks, so keep that in mind. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully this will help you guys lower the amount of pulls needed on this boss. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a very DPS driven fight. When you push, when mobs hit low health and trigger their abilities, and all of this can overlap in the most horrendous of ways. So we spent way too many pulls trying out different DPS cooldown rotations, push timings, and like I said, there is a lot of different ways to do this fight. Some people save Goliaths from phase 1 or phase 2 and bring them into intermission to transition faster, which we also tried but ended up not being too keen on for a first kill at least, but might definitely be something you go for speedier rekills. Now if you have any questions at all about this encounter, hit me up in the comments or become a patron and get access to the Stankie Discord where you can find raid Weakauras, all of our healing notes, and a lot of awesome people who'll help you out with anything raid related. Don't forget the usual stuff, like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. I'm also streaming all of our progression on Twitch, so make sure to check that out Mondays and Tuesdays. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.